On the second question first, on the issue of Crimea, it's not a done deal in the sense that the international community, by and large, is not recognizing the annexation of Crimea. Obviously, the facts on the ground are that the Russian military controls Crimea. There are a number of individuals inside of Crimea that are supportive of that process. There's no expectation that they will be dislodged by force. And so what we can bring to bear are the legal arguments, the diplomatic arguments, the political pressure, the economic sanctions that are already in place to try to make sure that there's a cost to that process. But I think it would be dishonest to suggest that there's a simple solution to resolving what has already taken place in Crimea. Although, history has a funny way of moving in twists and turns and not just in a straight line. So, how the situation in Crimea evolves in part depends on making sure that the international community stays unified in indicating that this was an illegal action on the part of Russia. With respect to the Russian troops that are along the border of Ukraine at the moment, right now they are on Russian soil. And if they stay on Russian soil, we oppose what appears to be an effort at intimidation, but Russia has a right legally to have its troops on its own soil. I don't think it's a done deal, and I think that Russia is still making a series of calculations. And again, those calculations will be impacted in part by how unified the United States and Europe are, and the international community is, in saying to Russia that this is not how in the 21st century we resolve disputes. I think it's particularly important for all of us to dismiss this notion that somehow Russian speakers or Russian nationals inside of Ukraine are threatened and that somehow that would justify Russian action. There has been no evidence that Russian speakers have been in any way threatened. If anything, what we've seen are provocateurs who have created scuffles inside of Ukraine. But when I hear analogies, for example, to Kosovo, where you had thousands of people who were being slaughtered by their government, it's a comparison that makes absolutely no sense. And I think it's important for everybody to be clear that and strip away some of the possible excuses for potential Russian action. With respect to the broader issue of states that are bordering Russia and what assurances do they have about future land grabs, as you put it, obviously, some of those countries are NATO countries, and as NATO allies, we believe that the cornerstone of our security is making sure that all of us, including the United States, are abiding by Article 5 and the notion of collective defense. And what we are now doing is organizing even more intensively to make sure that we have contingency plans and that every one of our NATO allies has assurances that we will act in their defense against any threats. That's what NATO is all about, and that's been the cornerstone of peace in the transatlantic region now for several generations. So we will uphold that, and there will be a series of NATO consultations. NATO ministerial is going to be coming up in which we further develop and deepen those plans. But I have not seen any NATO members who have not expressed a firm determination with respect to NATO members. Now, those countries, border countries that are outside of NATO, what we can do is what we're doing with Ukraine, which is trying to make sure that there's sufficient international pressure and a spotlight shine on the situation in some of these countries, and that we're also doing everything we can to bolster their economies, make sure that through various diplomatic and economic initiatives that they feel supported and that they know that we stand by them. But when it comes to a potential military response, that is defined by NATO membership. That's what NATO's about.
Jan Karl from ABC News.
Mr. President, thank you. In China, in Syria, in Egypt, and now in Russia, we've seen you make strong statements, issue warnings that have been ignored. Are you concerned that America's influence in the world, your influence in the world, is on the decline? And in the light of recent developments, do you think Mitt Romney had a point when he said that Russia is America's biggest geopolitical foe? If not Russia, who? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you think these sanctions will change Vladimir Putin's calculation, will cause him to back down? And do you see where do you see a Russian red line where if they go any further, if they go into eastern Ukraine, into Moldova, where options beyond sanctions have to be considered? Thank you.
Well, Jonathan, I think if the premise of the question is that whenever the United States objects to an action and other countries don't immediately do exactly what we want, that's been the norm, that would pretty much erase most of 20th century history. I think that there's a distinction between us being very clear about what we think is an appropriate action, what we stand for, what principles we believe in, versus what is, I guess, implied in the question, that we should engage in some sort of military action to prevent something. The truth of the matter is that the world's always been messy. And what the United States has consistently been able to do, and we continue to be able to do, is to mobilize the international community around a set of principles and norms, and where our own self-defense may not be involved, we may not act militarily. That does not mean that we don't steadily push against those forces that would violate those principles and ideals that we care about. Yes, you're right. The Syrian civil war is not solved, and yet Syria has never been more isolated. With respect to the situation in Ukraine, we have not gone to war with Russia. I think there's a significant precedent to that in the past. That does not mean that Russia's not isolated. In fact, Russia's far more isolated in this instance than it was 5 years ago with respect to Georgia, and more isolated than it was certainly during most of the 20th century when it was part of the Soviet Union. The point is that there are always going to be bad things that happen around the world. And the United States, as the most powerful nation in the world, understandably is looked to for solutions to those problems. And what we have to make sure we're doing are that we are putting all elements of our power behind finding solutions, working with our international partners, standing up for those principles and ideals in a clear way. There are going to be moments where military action is appropriate. There are going to be some times where that's not in the national security interests of the United States or some of our partners, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to make the effort or speak clearly about what we think is right and wrong, and that's what we've done. With respect to Mr. Romney's assertion that Russia is our number one geopolitical foe, the truth of the matter is that America's got a whole lot of challenges. Russia is a regional power that is threatening some of its immediate neighbors, not out of strength, but out of weakness. Ukraine has been a country in which Russia had enormous influence for decades, since the breakup of the Soviet Union. And we have considerable influence on our neighbors. We generally don't need to invade them in order to have a strong cooperative relationship with them. The fact that Russia felt compelled to go in militarily and lay bare these violations of international law indicates less influence, not more. And so my response then continues to be what I believe today, which is Russia's actions are a problem. They don't pose the #1 national security threat to the United States. I continue to be much more concerned when it comes to our security with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan, which is part of the reason why the United States, showing its continued international leadership, has organized a forum over the last several years that's been able to help eliminate that threat in a consistent way.